What's going on, guys? Devin here with Backcountry Exposure. Today we're going to dive into my first DIY sewing video, and we're going to sew a gathered end hammock for backpacking, hiking, and just general outdoor use. What I want to dive into first is the material list, and then we'll talk about some of the steps I took last night to prep the fabric for doing the actual sewing today. So what I did is I purchased my fabric from Ripstop by the Roll. And they've got a lot of different options on their website. Really good resource for you to be able to learn some things on how to sew, and tons and tons of different fabric options. Just a really good resource. So I definitely recommend that you check out Ripstop by the Roll. What I got from them is 4 yards of Hyper D 1.0 material. So this is an uncalendared Hyper D 1.0. And again, 4 yards. The thing that I like about Hyper D is it's really thin, so it's super lightweight, but it's nice and strong for what it is, and it is really soft. And having a hammock that is really soft, comfortable to lay in, is a really big deal. So the reason we got 4 yards of fabric is we're going to create a finished length hammock of 11 feet. I've cut this to be longer than that, and I'll explain that here in a second, but 11 feet is going to be the finished length of today's hammock. The other thing that you're going to need is a good high quality polyester thread. In this case, I purchased from Ripstop by the Roll the Moroccan Blue Mara 70 polyester thread, which is a really great option. It's nice to be able to have a one-stop shop from those guys, so we're going to be using that as a cool accent against the charcoal gray of the Hyper D. Other things that I purchased for this just to finish it off were from Dutch Wear Gear, Whoopie Slings, and a fixed length ridgeline, and from Lightsmith, some carbon fiber toggles. And then I'll show you a little bit later some of the tree straps that I have already sewn in preparation for this project. So let's go ahead and dive into it and sew ourselves a hammock. Alright guys, so let's walk through the steps that I've taken to prepare for sewing this hammock and putting it together. Again, we're going to do a gathered end hammock on this, and I explained before that it's going to be a finished length of 11 feet, and the width is going to be about 5 feet, just under 58 inches. And the reason for that is this fabric, this Hyper D 1.0, comes in at a total width of about 60 inches, but your working edge gives you about 58 inches, 59 inches or so. Now what I did is I laid out the fabric on the floor, and I didn't tape it down or anything, but I went ahead and measured everything out. And the first thing that I did is I cut off about 3/8 of an inch on each edge along the long edge to be able to basically create a nice clean line for me to work with. As well as, if you look at the edge of the fabric, you'll notice on one side there's some perforations from, I'm not sure what the process is that put those into the fabric, but basically I want to cut down a little bit of the fabric so when I do my rolled hem on the edge of the hammock, I've got a much cleaner hem for me to work with. So after I cut those edges down, I went ahead and measured my total length, and in this case I'm going to do 2-inch gathered end channels. So those sewn channels are going to be just over 2 inches in total length. They're going to be about 2.5 inches because I'm going to fold under a small hem on the edge of the 2 inches to create a little bit more fabric for the thread to go through, some strength, and to just finish it off. It'll make more sense once we get into the actual sewing of the hammock. But at that point, I went ahead and cut down the length of the fabric to that 11 feet 6 inches, which is going to give me a little bit more than 11 feet total. And then I've got extra fabric left over to be able to then sew a stuff sack for the hammock. So let's go ahead and get into sewing the hammock at this point. Alright guys, let me be honest for a second here. I'm not a master at this, so if you are a better sewer than me, kudos to you. But for those of you that are watching this that have never sewn before, just know that you can do it. It's not that difficult, but I do recommend that you maybe order some extra material, because sewing with this really slippery, lightweight type of materials is going to be difficult if it's your first time sitting down to a sewing machine, but it's really not that hard to figure out. So the more that you practice, the more time you spend in the machine getting to know and understand your machine, you'll become a better stitcher at that point. So what we're going to do here as step one is we're going to start along the long edge of the hammock, and we're going to sew what is called a rolled hem. So basically you just roll the edges over. In this case we're going to do it 2 times, and we're going to create a rolled hem so it has a nice finished look. I'm not using a rolled hem foot or anything like that. I'm using just a standard foot with my machine. And there are kind of like 2 ways that you can do this. If you are not super familiar with the fabric and first time sewing, you can do just a single stitch with a single roll first, and then fold it over a second time, and then stitch along that same stitch line for you to be able to run it through. I am going to roll it twice for me, and we're going to run it through just a single stitch in this case. Okay, so just to get this started, we're going to do that roll. And the biggest and most important thing on this, guys, is that you don't rush it. Like, do not rush creating this at all. You want it to look really nice and clean. So don't rush your work. So I'm gonna just set this into the machine here. Okay, so if you look, you can see that I've got my hem nice and rolled up. And what I'm doing is basically, at this point, I'm using the foot of the machine to help me get this started. So I've dropped my foot down, and I've lined up my needle to be a little bit further left. And so if you've got a machine that has that capability, that's something that I like to do. And what we're going to do is we're going to stitch forward about 3 or 4 stitches, and then we're going to do a back stitch to lock it in there. And then we're just going to run this same length of stitch nice and straight all the way down to the other end of the hammock. And once we get to that end, then we're going to do the same back stitch and do the same rolled hem on the other long side of the hammock. I'm just finishing up this second side, and then we will move on to the end channels for the hammock. The puckering that happens on the end of these is really frustrating sometimes. Okay, so now what I've done is I am going to start creating the end channel along the 2 ends of the hammock. And we're going to do a 2-inch channel, but we're going to fold this over once about a 1/2 inch, 3/4 of an inch. That's going to give us an extra piece of fabric to sew through. That's going to give us some added strength for the hammock, as well as it just gives us a nice clean finished edge for this hem for creating the channel. So when we get up to the machine, what I've done is use these binder clips to be able to essentially give myself the entire length of this end pieced together or folded over and clipped together, so that it makes it easier when I'm up at the machine to be able to sew that. But all I'm going to do is fold this over, and using a ruler, I'm just going to measure 2 inches when I'm up there, and then I'm going to sew a line along this edge all the way down, and then we're going to do a second line, and then we're going to do a third line, and that's going to give us our total strength to be able to lay in this thing without it feeling like it's going to rip. So now the reason that we do a 2-inch channel is that's going to give us enough space and room within the hammock to be able to run our Whoopie Slings or whatever suspension we're going to use, so that it has enough space to be able to bunch up And so 2 inches is kind of a good amount of space for you to be able to accomplish that. Just really want this to be lined up the best I can get it. And then we're just gonna make sure that as we're sewing down that this channel stays at a nice 2-inch length. And that's it. So let's go ahead and get sewing on this thing. I always have to start out really slow. So we'll back stitch and we'll just start going through it. Just gotta play with it, you gotta practice. It can be tough, but just keep working at it. I think that's the biggest thing I have to keep telling myself is don't get discouraged by how like slippery the material is, how hard it can be to get through the machine, and but it's kind of just like once you get started, it goes pretty simple. All right, so this gives you an idea of what that end channel is going to look like, that first line of stitching. So now we're going to go through and we're going to add a second line, and then we're going to add a third line. Set this in the machine, and basically what I'm doing is I'm going to line the edge of the foot up with the stitch line of that first stitch line. So we're going to put the foot down, and the nice thing is now that this is all stitched together, it's going to go pretty quick and easy. So we're going to get this started a little bit. We're going to back tack. So the last thing that I'm going to do is, and it's not totally necessary, but it just gives me kind of like some comfort in knowing that I've got a little bit of extra strength. But right here on where the 2 rolled hems meet up on the very end of the hammock, I'm just going to do a pretty tight zigzag stitch to be able to kind of close this off and lock it together and give it some added strength. And that's it. So we're just getting finished up here, putting the last line of stitching on, and then we'll be finished. And it's that easy, guys. It's really not that difficult. It just takes time. And to be honest, this has taken me about 2.5 hours to do this hammock, so you're watching it in much less time. But it's taken me about that much time to be able to get through this. Well guys, there you go. That's how you sew a gathered end hammock out of Hyper-D 1.0 material for backpacking. So again, this is 11 feet in total length, and we're about 5 feet wide, about 58 inches or so. And yeah, now all we got to do is feed our Whoopie Slings through the channels, pull them tight, and attach our ridge line, and we'll be good to go. So anyway guys, if you have questions, please ask them down in the comments, because this is not like overly comprehensive. I know I kind of skipped over some things that you might have questions on, so please ask your questions. But as always guys, please subscribe to the channel if you haven't. I've got more DIY sewing videos that I'm going to be doing for various projects, and so look for those to come out. Again, hit that subscribe button, and as always guys, thank you so much for watching.